That was the second try at this video. Having some computer troubles. Response video to Nick, the modern mystic, the general subject of our programming and the question of whether or not we have any control over it, in any sense of that word. Nick used the example that if you're programmed red, you're not going to be able to produce blue. And no matter how much thinking you do. And to me, that's it's an obvious, it can be obviously defeated. I mean, it just doesn't seem, thinking is everything. Thinking organizes thoughts. The more time you spend organizing it, the more efficiently your brain will use the information it has. The more time you expend, ordering the information and qualifying it and quantifying it and, putting it in its place, it becomes the logic becomes stronger, and the logic becomes more capable, and thinking creates. I mean, we have this capacity of imagination. I mean, thinking is basically provides you a capacity to change your perception and to realize something new, to see something from a new angle, from a new point of view, and to there's probably no better word than realize something. I mean, you can see it, you can understand it, and it doesn't have to come from some external source. The information you have is all you need. You could make a person who has an intelligence, and you could turn them into a blind, deaf mute and give them no stimulation at all, and internally they're still going to create new understanding. They're still going to see the universe and the world and their life and everything from new points of view. It doesn't stop. It's always running. So I think, of course, somebody can change their programming from red to blue that fast. With one realization. It's happened in my own life. There's been events and circumstances and times where a little bit of thought, and all of a sudden I realized something about myself, or I realized something about the world I live in, and I realized, I had a wrong idea, or a wrong this, or I overreacted, or I did that. I have perspective, understanding that I didn't have the second before. It was a new understanding, and that new understanding changed everything. And it really, I think you look at programming as just too static. The key part of this whole thing is the idea. It might be only a 5% function of the brain, but it's the most important function, is the fact that it's rewriting the software constantly. The programming is evolving and changing. Intelligence has its own agenda, in a sense, its own rules of selection, its own rules of evolution. It grows, it expands, it changes over time, and it doesn't require some kind of static, hard programming. It already has the tools to build itself. It's a reproducing, just like life is a reproducing organism. Intelligence is a reproducing entity. It's evolving, creating itself, creating new, expanding, growing, changing. It's dynamic. It's not static. And maybe some people never acquire enough basic facts or enough information to do much with their intelligence, and that's sort of my argument. But the other half of my argument is there's only a few facts you need to have to really empower intelligence to control the ape and the lizard. And you might not like that analogy, but to me it's to call it a gross oversimplification is, to me, a gross exaggeration, because it's not. It's a metaphor, but to me, it's spot on when it comes to identifying the fact that we have these different parts to our thinking machine. It is this subjective, conditioned, emotional part. We have this hardwired part that creates the hunger and the need to sleep and the other fundamental desires and drives. And then we have this articulate language with logic and as you called it, the desire to organize. I mean, it's thinking just leads there, it just goes there automatically. That's just what it tends to do. It tends to want to understand, label, quantify, qualify, establish the meaning of everything that processes through it. I mean, that's its primary function of intelligence. The primary function of this whole language art is word association and combining definitions and refining definitions, and that creates our perception and our perspective. And so, I guess there's no point in it's not a dead horse, but there's no point in beating this horse, I guess, more than I need to. I just think that you've got to understand that, yes, it's a die that our behavior is extruded through, but that die is constantly being changed. We're constantly editing it and changing it and modifying it. And there's some parts that we just don't have much control over. I mean, certain detail is beyond our capacity to easily change. I mean, our sexual preferences, our personal affections, relationships, these are things that we don't have much control over, but we have a lot of control over the understanding part, the perception part, in terms of context and all the detail that's added to our perception of anything. I mean, some people see a tree and they just see a tree. Why don't, maybe you or I see a tree and we see 4 billion years of evolution. We see 4 billion years of living creatures eating each other. And then what does that mean? And what does this mean? And we see a whole context tied to that. And it's not just a tree anymore. And that doesn't come from some outside thing. That doesn't come from some rigid, hard programming. It comes from something that is constantly evolving and changing inside of us. That image is constantly getting more and more refined, more and more organized, there's always more and more detail and context being added. And so we aren't born red, we aren't conditioned red, we aren't, it's not static. It's something, like I said, tomorrow you could change the world with an idea. I really believe that. I really believe that if you could get, a few paragraphs into the average person's head, that you could change their perception. If you, for example, let's say if you could force people to sit down for 5 minutes and contemplate space, just look into, at night, just look at the stars for 5 minutes. And then you force them to do it for 10 minutes. And then you force them to do it for 15 minutes. And then you force them to do it for 20 minutes. I would say that what they're going to see is going to be different depending on how much time you give them to ponder it, how much time they spend thinking about it. And it might require 20 minutes, or it might require 20 years. But the point is there's a point where they might have some startling realization, where they might recognize, oh, I can see it now from a new angle. I can see the backside of myself. I understand my relationship to this thing called the universe. I understand my relationship on this planet Earth. Oh yeah, we're hurling through space, and all this is going on, and blah blah blah. And so I understand. I have a new perspective, a new context. And guess what? Having a new pretty hat doesn't mean anything anymore, because I understand something. I have a bigger perspective, and so it does change. Perception changes with thinking.